5, 6, 7, 8, 9 today? 5 through 9?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and however far I get.
Okay.
And I should give you a better answer than that, but see, I've not printed. I've made up the test, but I've not printed it up, and I won't print it up till the class is over. That's something I was explaining to the other class just ahead of you, because I don't know how much I'm going to cover and what I'm not. I'll get in my car and think, oh, I forgot this, and I forgot that. And I'll probably delete, when it's over with, I'll delete a few questions that's on it. But I've made the test up for next week. Now for today, that's something else. For today, it's chapters 1 through 4. But for next week, it's chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's it. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 to catch up with the syllabus. But I'm not going to, I mean, it depends on how far I get. But by the end of the class, I'll know.
Okay.
All right, by the end of the class. But officially, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 next week. Now, okay, now. Okay, something I forgot to tell the other class, it might cost me a little bit. Do not send me a message by way of the iCollege messaging. I don't check it. Now, if that's what you've been doing, I don't check it here at Montville. I have to check home emails and my personal phone emails, and then this college email, and there's somewhere something's got to give. So, I mean, if you've been sending me a message through iCollege, it might be wrong, it might be bad, but I mean, but I try to check emails. I checked email yesterday, and I just had a student tell me that she tried to send me email, and I did not get it. And again, this happens a lot, where they'll say they sent it J. Cunningham 18, and there's a lot of J. Cunninghams that teach here. I did receive one from a student in the other class, but so little, I guess I'm kind of a little bit upset because I did not get the email. Now, this won't happen in this class. But someone said there's an entitlement to it. She said a whole hour of taking the test. Well, they are entitled to it. She is supposed to go find the last I don't. I mean, it's our government trying to bend over backwards to accommodate certain people. And I'm supposed to cooperate. But sometimes you just simply, hey, I said, I've got a class to get to. I've got to get to my other class. I mean, you know, so. But she was going to take the whole hour. Finally, when the class came to rescue. They're convinced that they were students. Well, all right, leaving that. I mean, okay, that's what I just said is before. I'm going to have to delete it before but I'm going to keep it for my benefits. All right, enough of me, enough of my issues. Now, we're going to start with chapter 5. But first, I said I'd try to go over the syllabus. Essentially, now, every teacher gets questions asked, him or her, and they say the answer's on the syllabus. The answer's on the syllabus. The answer's on the syllabus. So anyway, I'll try to answer the question, but we all get the questions. So, but most of the questions you have are on the syllabus. As for today's test, it turns out the only test questions I had were multiple choice, so I wound up putting one, but we won't be a scan total, so don't. But I did turn some of my multiple choice questions into fill in the blank. What I have learned is that some students cannot handle fill in the blanks questions, and some students do not handle multiple choice questions very well. Well, this time we got both. Maybe next time I'll make them an essay. I don't know, but I heard that a lot of the students here cannot handle an essay very well either. We try to accommodate as best as we can. All right. Come test time, there'll be two different test banks, so you won't be seeing the same thing that your neighbor is, and you won't be seeing the same thing your neighbor is. Two different sets of questions. Okay, yeah, hopefully all of you know the reason for that. Now, there are 8 persons registered for class, and I see 6 over here. I won't take roll because the ones of you who turn in the test will be counted present, and those of you who won't. So there's no roll call will be redundant. All right, anybody else have any questions before I start? Okay, chapter 5, which I was supposed to have done last week, but didn't.
on the test?
What's that?
Have you let a user know?
No, not that. All right, well, now that you brought it up, let me tell you, when test time comes, I don't need to see anyone with earphones in their ears. I don't need to see any cell phones out in the open. That's then. And also another rule that we have to go by. I'll let you leave the room before the test starts if you want to or you think you'll need to. I'll let you back in. But once the test has started, when you get up to leave the room, I'm going to have to say, hand me your test. All of you look like you're young enough with my grandchildren, so I'll say that respectfully, but the only old person in here is me. In 360 days, I will turn 70. I just turned 69 5 days ago.
That's right. Happy birthday.
Yes, in 360 days, I'll be 70 years old. Anyway. All right. Chapter 5. Where does it start? Right there. All right. Okay, colonial America. All right, in the 18th century, 1701, 1770. All right, what I want you to get from chapter 5, for a few things. Already, the American colonists were becoming the richest people on the face of the earth. This is particularly true in your middle colonies, particularly true of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. Pennsylvania farmers were generally well off financially, or you might say well-to-do. So were New Jersey farmers, Delaware farmers. They did not have the hardships that your Southerners had. For one thing, I lived in Pennsylvania once. Pennsylvania has fewer mosquitoes than the South does. And the cold climate actually is beneficial to life because it kills a lot of disease germs. But there was something else, folks, and this was to be an issue in the beginning. What constitutes money? At one time in the history of mankind, money consisted of gold and silver coins that you carried around with you. Then came the invention of banks where you could keep your money for safekeeping, and it would draw interest. The banks would pay you for letting them use your money. But then, as time went on, we developed a concept of paper money. The Chinese are said to have invented paper money, and let's face it, without paper money. Now, there was a big move against paper money. James Madison, for instance, who became president, who wrote the Constitution, said that paper money contributes to inflation. Maybe it's true, but I can imagine working at Lockheed, and I spent 27 years there, and having them pay us in gold and silver coins. I mean, we'd need a wheelbarrow to carry them out, almost, and then lug that wheelbarrow to our cars, and then try to deposit all those coins in some bag in our car. I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but basically, folks, it couldn't be done. Instead, well, eventually, to make a long story short, money became a matter of a transaction by electronic means, where you put the money in your bank, and then you want to buy something, you get out your debit card, credit card, or whatever, and that becomes money. But now, getting back to the colonies, they started trading in paper money very early. And this made them richer than they otherwise would have been, because there wasn't enough gold and silver coins to go around. So they started trading paper money. And of course, this was eventually to lead to problems because the British wanted to be paid in gold and silver coins, which was scarce in the New World. All right, starting out with the Puritans in New England. And again, for those of you following the book, I'm looking at page 101. The Puritan population increased rapidly due to two things: immigration immigration and natural increase. Now, what that means is that Puritan women averaged about 10 or 12 babies per woman, and oftentimes more than that. Now, a lot of their women died in childbirth. That's true. And a lot of the husbands then outlived their wives, owing to the fact that so many women died in childbirth. But they would have a big lot of children. Now, and also more immigrants kept coming in. Well, the original Puritans were given a plot of land, I mentioned that. But after a while, supposing a man had, let's say, 8 sons, he could not divide his land up into 8 parts. So he'd say to his oldest son, you take one, my inheritance, the land, and you other 7, you go out west and find you some more land. So the other son would pack up and move farther inland, farther and farther away from the coast. This, of course, contributed to, because each of these sons would have maybe 5 or 6, 7 sons apiece. So this meant that they had to take more and more of the land. If you look on a map, New England is smaller than the middle colonies and smaller than the southern colonies. And the land became scarce rather quickly. And it forced some New Englanders to move to other places, but land became very scarce very quickly. Now, again, at first, New Englanders would try to divide the land equally among their sons, but then, again, that became impractical as time went on. In New England, the big industry was fishing, and timber. The tall New England pines were used to make masts for the sailing vessels. The pines in New England tend to grow up nice and straight and tall, and they would use these to build masts. And New England became a fishing center. Also, well, it became a farming. Now, there was another problem that New Englanders had in getting their produce to market. When the snows melt in New England, the mud gets literally knee-deep. And it becomes, you know for a fact, it becomes very difficult to transport your goods to market. Your pig, for instance, with its small feet and heavy body, simply could not traverse that mud to get to market. And they would try to carry them to market alive, you know, where the butchers would take care of there, but they didn't have a means to refrigerate them. So this created problems as far as getting the pigs and even the cattle to market. I mean, the cattle can't march very well if they're up to their knees in mud. So this created a necessity for roads. Eventually, a man named Ben Franklin convinced them to pave the roads, but that was to come a little bit later in their history. Now, so much of New England living also was involved with sea trade. The New Englanders became great sailors, and their ships went to places like Africa, the West Indies, and England. All right, moving from New England to the middle colonies. Let's see, now I'm going to have to... Oops. Now, middle colonies. Again, the middle colonies, their farmers were one of the most prosperous farmers on earth. They raised a lot of cows and they became notoriously good dairy farmers. The cows gave milk as well as beef. The hamburger had not yet been invented, but that was to come later. But they became fairly wealthy, and the center of their trade was wheat and cattle. And having lived in Pennsylvania, I can tell you still, the Pennsylvanians are farmers, and they have a lot of wheat and cattle. At first, they lived around the along the Susquehanna River, before you get to the mountains. But then as they moved farther west, they had to move west the same way the New Englanders did, because they had too many people living near the coastline. So they pack up the younger children and move to the west. And as they moved west, they eventually encountered the mountains. They found ways to farm between the mountains, but some of the mountains are very, very steep. Now, unlike in Kentucky, where until Daniel Boone found Cumberland Gap, they couldn't cross the mountains with a covered wagon. The Pennsylvania farmers found gaps in the mountains all over the place, and they were able to get across the mountains from the beginning of their history. This was not true in Kentucky, from North Carolina to Kentucky. Now moving on to the south, and if you think I'm moving fast, I am. The South wound up developing what you might call plantations. In other words, because of the nature of the type of farming they did, they were farming mostly tobacco as a cash crop, and therefore the farmers, some of the farmers acquired large estates and developed large plantations, and this was to go on for a couple hundred years, beginning in the 1700s when the first plantations hit, until the 1900s when the last plantations closed down. South plantations. Now, again, so yeah, about the middle colonies, the Pennsylvania farmers were well off. And again, mostly wheat and cattle. South, tobacco, in some places rice. Not a lot of dairy farming went on in the South. Now this was eventually to lead to a lot of southern people developing diseases like pellagra and scurvy, because their diet did not include enough vegetables or enough of what they needed, but some of that was to come later. The South had a couple of really good seaports. The best seaport for the South being at Charleston. Originally that was called Charlestown, named after King Charles II of England. I mean, hey, the state of Georgia was named after King George II also. A lot of the areas here in our own country were named after English kings living at that time. Now, the South also had another feature about it. It was to prove disastrous labor. In South Carolina, the majority of the population were African slaves. This did not start out this way at first. Now, what I want to say about the slaves, Christianity had outlawed slavery during the days of the late Roman Empire. And the original blacks who were brought into South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia were just considered indentured servants like their white counterparts. But then as time went on, I mean, I've read articles step by step how they went from being indentured servants who were considered free to slaves. It was a gradual step. The word slave does not appear in Southern original sources until the late 1600s, or in 1619 when they first came, they were laborers. But by about 1670, 50 years later, the Southerners admitted they were slaves, and this was become an issue that was to eventually divide the country and lead to problems of which we have not yet gotten over with to this day. The slave, again, a lot of the work on the tobacco plantations, a lot of the work in the rice fields, a lot of the work on the farms was done by slave labor. And in South Carolina, blacks continue to outnumber whites to this day. South Carolina and Mississippi both. All right. Now, on the field of religion, we can't leave out religion. There came a new idea called deism. Deism compared God to a clockmaker. A person will make a clock and then leave it to run itself. Whereas a clockmaker doesn't sit there and tick and talk and tick and talk. The clock runs itself.
Isn't that atheism?
Well, now what they believe, now it's okay, that's a good question. What they believed was that there was a God, the deists, that's where they get the, and they believed that God had made the universe and then left the universe to run itself and did not interfere much in the affairs of man. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to teach deism, I'm trying to teach about it only. I'm not trying in any way to convince anyone of it. I mean, I'm not trying to.
So what is it?
Deism, that God had made the world, but then the world run itself by its own natural laws and did not need any kind of interference. He did not maintain it, it just the universe ran itself. This where deism was to lead to was that, all right, getting back to the clock, was that the clock could put itself together and run it and make itself and run itself. And eventually it was to lead step by step, just like slavery occurred in steps. Deism was to lead to atheism in steps. Starting out with that God made the world and left to run itself to where the world made itself and could run itself. Let's say that again.
It would be deism, agnostic, and then
All right, it might go to agnostic through a step. It goes in steps. I didn't name all the steps.
No, I'm asking
But it goes in steps.
I'm just trying to, okay, never mind.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I understand, I think I understand your question. But where this was eventually to lead was to, that number one belief among academia today is that everything in the universe, every phenomenon, has a natural explanation, and there is no spirit. There's nothing about this universe except what we can see and weigh and feel and touch. And again, I wish I had some soap now, I'll wash my mouth off when you said that, but there's some things I just don't believe. But nevertheless, academia teaches that the universe put itself together and runs all by itself. That's the standard view. That's like the number one assumption. And that's where this was eventually lead. But right now, they still believe, oh yeah, there's a God, and He made the universe, but He does not take part in it. It runs itself. Again, not that I believe this in any way at all. That's what they were teaching at the time.
So from here to far, what about Charleston up there? What do you know about Charleston?
What's
That's
that?
that too.
I missed what we needed to know about Charleston.
Oh, Charleston was one of the big ports from which the free world trade, or the free world, the New World. The New World received from other countries tea and oranges and whatever else, the lemons from the farther south. And now, folk, when I was a kid in school, I did not realize how important trade was. But just, to give you some idea how important trade is, even something as small as, this. There's no one place on earth that has everything you need to make a simple little marker. Much less when you start putting together a computer or an airplane or automobile. Everything I need to make my automobiles in my backyard, I can roll the rubber, no you can't. I can mine the steel and iron, and I can, no you can't. So therefore trade is essential if we're going to have a technological society like this one. The light bulbs we use in this room came from one place, the ceiling came from another place, the rug came from a different place. We get it by trade. Trade is extremely important. And again, the New World became a center of trade, and trade is how some people become rich. And no, trade does not mean that one person wins and one person loses. In an ideal trade, both sides win. This group makes more of this product than it needs, but it doesn't have this other product. So that group has the other product, but they don't have the product that you have in excess of. So you trade, and it benefits both of you. All right, now, religion. Because deism led to people becoming indifferent, eventually there was a reaction to that, and it's called the First Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was a big revival that occurred in the early 1700s. It was led by men like Jonathan Edwards. Yeah, Jonathan Edwards. In other words, if you study the history of Christianity, you'll find that all down through time, there have been some outstanding religious leaders. We had one die here earlier this year named Billy Graham. And you might have asked, but who was before Billy Graham? Well, there was a man named Billy Sunday who was the #1 preacher of his time. That was before Billy. And then before Billy Sunday, there was Dwight Moody, and before him there was Charles G. Finney. Don't remember all these names now. But basically, Jonathan Edwards was the #1 preacher of his day. And he was from New England. Working in the South was George Whitefield. We have a county here in Georgia named after him, except we call it Whitfield. And I've heard that name pronounced Whitfield and Whitefield. These were the leaders of the religious movement at that time. Now, the Great Awakening is where it is emotional outbursts. I mean, a lot of people shed a lot of tears and cry during their services, and they'd shout and whatever and sing loud songs. This was a Great Awakening, and it did, in some cases, seem to have a permanent effect on the people, and it got the people at that time more interested in religious matters.
So was George Winthrop, was he a preacher too?
Whitfield was a preacher.
Jonathan was a preacher.
What's that?
They're both preachers?
Yeah, they were both preachers. Edwards in New England and Whitfield in Philadelphia and South Carolina and those places. Whitfield traveled mainly in the South. Ben Franklin was a big skeptic, but he and Whitfield were close friends, even though they both knew they had differences. Franklin attended one of Whitfield's services, and Whitfield moved him to his purse. Ben Franklin is. He was a very emotional, persuasive preacher. Again, it came about as a result of a big indifference. Now, I want to say this. I'm old enough to observe this in some families. A lot of times when you have parents who are religiously indifferent, their children will be extremely religious children. And a lot of times parents who are very, very religious will have children who are indifferent. This happens many a time over. These things go in cycles. And that was the case here. You have, throughout American history, you'll have times where the religion was almost took a back seat. If you study it in detail, you'll find the Great Awakening was partly in response to a movement called Universalism. Universalism taught that everybody was going to be saved, no matter how comfortable life live. In the end, we all were saved anyway. And it encouraged people to live in all kinds of sin and vice.